Hi, everyone. My name is Lonnie Bloom. I'm an audit partner here at Witham, where we provide audit, tax, and advisory services. I'm a member of our technology practice, and I co-lead our e-commerce sector. I'm very excited to be here today with Dilip Rao, the co-founder and CEO of Sharebite. For today's conversation, we'll be talking about the food tech industry and some of the innovations and disruptions happening in the space. The food tech landscape spans across different verticals from food production, bioengineered foods, restaurant and retail technologies, and e-commerce, including online grocers and meal kits. Dilip, thank you for joining us today. If you could do a quick intro, and then we could jump into my first question about Sharebite. How does Sharebite fit into the food tech ecosystem, and would you consider yourself a disruptor in this space?
Lonnie, thanks for having me again. So you mentioned the phrase food tech, and we're quasi food tech because we're a mission-driven meal benefits platform, and we're built exclusively for companies, right? So we have, we tend to sort of get grouped into food tech. We kind of are, but we're also HR tech too, right? So the key thing that we do is help empower, heads of total rewards, heads of benefits, heads of HR, C-suite execs on how to best engage their employees with a benefit, which is a meal stipend that helps engage employees. Right? It's across the board. The product has a very high utilization rate. So I'll get into all that stuff into why we do that. Would we consider ourselves a disruptor in the space? That depends, because that must mean that there's like a prior model of what we do that exists. There is one model, right, that previously used to be dominated by a company called Seamless, now known as Grubhub. They essentially had a monopoly in this space, but they were largely structured as a corporate food ordering or food delivery service, and they catered to companies. Right. So when we came around, we did disrupt that model, but our vision was slightly bigger than that, or not slightly, considerably bigger than that. We always envisioned ourselves as a category creating company, and our vision as an organization is to get every worker in America fed, and we want to power that. Right. And it's not a novel idea, because if you go across the globe, like in 40 countries, nearly 40 countries across the globe, it's actually a standard practice to offer your employees what's called a meal voucher, right? So it's as common as, salary, a health insurance, right? And all these other things. Meal vouchers up there. And, the United States is the only country, right? And one of the few sort of OECD countries, right? Developed nations, where that's not a standard practice. So we're actually kind of spearheading we're sort of category creating in that space. Yes, we disrupted the previous model of what may have existed. But, over the last few years, we've really accelerated that vision to getting every worker in America fed. And today, the type of companies that use us are literally category leading companies across every industry.
That's great, Dilip. Perfect intro. When I think of your company, I think of a disruption just because of your mission, right? We hear about Seamless and Grubhub and, DoorDash and things like that, but your mission certainly sets you guys apart. I know we'll talk about it a little bit later. Dilip, getting into my next question, what are some of the barriers to entering this market, right? We mentioned DoorDash, we mentioned Seamless and Grubhub, who have accumulated such a large share of the market, although they're largely focused on the consumer segment. Is this barrier to entry, was this a problem starting out for Sharebite, and is it an ongoing problem or threat to the company?
Yeah. Just as you said, the companies you just mentioned are best in class operators, but on the consumer side of things, right? The thing that it's a very high barrier to entry, right, to the market, because we sell directly to the enterprise. And selling to the enterprise, selling to corporate customers comes with it's a totally different ballgame. It's a totally different beast. So you've got to have the most perfect product. You've got to have literally every single use case, edge case, like planned out. The product has to be so robust that it's better than the whatever the incumbent platform was. For us, that was seamless. So the average customer. So prior to Sharebite, most of our customers ended up, being on the seamless platform, right? So the average customer that switched over to Sharebite was on the seamless platform for, on average 18 years, right? Which is
Oh, wow.
crazy. And so they never really they essentially had a monopoly in the space, right? So servicing corporate clients. And the restaurants also benefit too, right? So nowadays what has happened is as sort of food delivery has become a thing, right? Like there's not a single person that doesn't understand what food delivery is today, at least on the consumer side of things. These third-party platforms have kind of, stepped in and said, look, Lonnie Bloom, he used to call you, to order directly and you would deliver it. Now you got to go through me and you got to pay me for that, right? So that has upset some restaurant operators because, a lot of restaurants, they're low margin. They can't afford that. So they either make it up with price increases or they pass it through to you or something of that sort. The interesting thing is the corporate segment has been, is, and will always be the only sort of remaining swath of, I guess, order transaction volume for restaurants that is always additive, almost often additive, right? So it's not like cannibalizing the existing customer that used to be in front of you. When we work with small businesses and restaurants, we go to them and say, look, we're not bringing you one-off orders. We're literally bringing you like hundreds of orders, on a recurring basis, right? So restaurants love that because they get to, there's, economies of scale. They get to produce that stuff, much faster, and it's more cost effective for them. So they actually get to make a profit on that stuff while, still, providing the service, and also they get to, have this recurring access to corporate business. And, there's also a spillover effect of that, which we don't necessarily capitalize on. We allow the customer to kind of do their own, sort of supporting that restaurant. If we have a restaurant that a user at one of our corporate clients loves, there's a good chance that they'll end up supporting that restaurant outside of the scope of like, at the office or, the meal stipend that they have. So for us, it was a very, very high barrier to entry. And that's why in the earliest days, I went to like hundreds of investors, like, look, we're going to build like, sort of the category leading company. We're going to topple the Seamless kind of monopoly in the space in the corporate, arena. That's how Seamless started, by the way. And then they kind of waded into the consumer side. So very, very high barrier to entry. And the sales cycles tend to be like unsustainably long, right? And so, but we've always been a mission driven company. We met many, many years ago, and the vision of the organization has been the same. And, it's like anything else, right? First slowly and then suddenly. So if you look at our growth over the last, year, let alone the last 2 years, it's just been like exponential, mainly because the adoption rate among corporate clients has been quite high. So starting out and if we had to rebuild Sharebite today, I wouldn't do it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Sounds
just,
like, it's a ton of legwork. Sounds like for you. You say hundreds of interviews with the investors, and I'm sure even more with restaurants, right? Trying to convince them to use the product.
Yeah, restaurants for sure, but also the corporate clients, right? Because the restaurants don't really want to talk to you unless you have like guaranteed business, right?
Right.
And so there's this kind of like chicken and egg problem where it's like, wait, yeah, I'll give you a shot, but where are the orders, right?
Right.
So it's really hard. So like, to build essentially a competitor to Sharebite, or now that we're the incumbent. So many of the top sort of 50 customers of the previous sort of monopoly in the space have largely switched over to Sharebite, right?
Right.
And so we don't really look at one of our company values is like, you know, um, you can be, I think it's Amazon or, Intel or something like that. It's like, um, we're competitor aware, but we're customer obsessed, right? So we've always been obsessed with our customers, um, and building the features for the enterprise, for the end users, for the administrators, which is really hard to do because, you know, rule number one of building a product is you got to talk to your customer. These customers don't have the time to talk to you. They don't want to talk to you. So
Right.
that's like the hardest thing. So that represents a very, very high barrier to entry for us. It was a very high barrier to entry, but we were unrelenting. This team was vested in this mission. We were going to build the category leading company for meal benefits in the United States. And today we are closer to that vision than we have ever been in the company's history.
That's great. I'm super happy to hear that. I know we met, 5+ years ago when you helped us cater tacos and margaritas at a WeWork event, right? So that was earlier when you were starting out, but it's great to hear that. See, when I think of your industry, I think of logistics and possible distribution nightmare, right? With the growing reliance on technology, and including AI, machine learning, how has technology impacted this logistics challenge?
Yeah, great question. So we're a nerdy tech and product company, right? So like more so than anything else, if there was a way to define Sharebite, we're a nerdy, tech and engineering company. So um, we have leveraged, um, everyone calls it AI, but we've leveraged machine learning for some time now. And we actually stood up our own logistics sort of operation because for us, the service delivery component is the most important part, right? Because one of our largest products at Sharebite is what we call Sharebite stations. Right? So if you're working at, um, pretty much like any of these, like whether it's large car manufacturing companies, all the way to professional sports teams and tech companies and private equity firms, hedge funds, et cetera. Many of these companies now offer a stipend for their employees to order lunch. Some of it adapted it during the pandemic as part of their return to the office program, and they've kept it because it was so successful. Right now, they're like, "What we could not have brought our employees back to the office without Sharebite." So, like, we have a lot of goodwill on that side. Um, so for us, partnering with not only sort of the larger players, right, that the consumer folks that do have a third party delivery thing for, but we do that on a one off basis. But we also, even if you look at our logo right here, it looks like a flower, but it's actually three people kind of sitting around, right? So it's like those are all of our stakeholders. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that we supported local businesses that had just been largely cratered during the pandemic because these are like third party delivery service providers. They were, they were struggling. So our team, what we did was we put together this technology. We basically entered into partnerships with all these, third party delivery platforms across all the cities that we service. And we basically batch the orders. So what happens is when all of your employees, order, right? All of those orders go into the restaurant in one sort of transaction, right? So the restaurant sees it and produces it like, mass produces every single meal. It's all customized. And we do that across the board. So maybe the company next door to you, the building next to you, the building across the street from you. So route density is something that we really focused heavily on. And we're able to do that in a very cost-effective manner. So third-party delivery service providers, local ones, right, not the large ones, they benefit heavily because we keep them busy like pretty much all day long, right? So there's that. So the logistics side, also a very high barrier to entry because it's very hard to do. It took us a long time to get it right. Standing it up we tried to do it. It's expensive to do. We'd never set out to be in logistics, but now that we've been doing it for a little over now close to 3 years, we realized that like we can do this in a way where we can create a tremendous amount of value for end users and the restaurants, and the local third-party delivery service providers. So they get to make money. Everybody makes money along the way. And there's a tremendous amount of value creation that happens for a lot of stakeholders along the way, every single time that a transaction goes through. So from a technology standpoint, we're always leveraging machine learning. We mostly use that stuff for internal purposes, but for customer facing, to make operations much more streamlined internally. We have turned our attention to how can we leverage some of the tools that we already use internally to make the user experience much better. So that's an ongoing thing. From a logistics standpoint, we've built a set of rails, right? So we look at everything that we do in the organization, not from a process, but more of a systems kind of lens. And that systems lens, like everything has to be on its own set of rails. So logistics has now essentially turned into its own product, but we only use it for ourselves. Maybe down the line, we could probably, commercialize that to others, because I know that this is a large pain point for many other companies.
Oh yeah, it's super interesting to see and hear the technology that goes on behind the scenes, right? From a consumer perspective, you always just, you get frustrated when an order goes through and you don't get it in time, right? That's all you think about. You don't think about all the tech that goes on behind the scenes to make it happen, and to hear that you're kind of consolidating these, you think of a restaurant getting a ticket for an order, you don't want 100 tickets, you want one or two consolidated, and it sounds like that's what you guys are doing, which is, beating those inefficiencies and making things better for both the restaurant and Sharebite. It's great.
Yeah.
So looking ahead to the future of technology, what are some of the technologies the company's investing in, and just for the food, tech industry in general, are there any sort of technologies that you think will be the next big disruption?
There's so much technology out there. There's so many exciting things, because you can see, like, restaurants it's a massive market, right? If we're talking about particular restaurants, and there are, and it's very fragmented too. So when you have fragmentation of that scale and size, and people kind of focused on one area altogether, there are so many companies out there. If you go to any of these restaurant conferences, you see people that are just building things that you never thought was even a problem. But the thing that excites me the most is that they are building these tools to help these small businesses at restaurants, because oftentimes when people start a restaurant, it's a labor of love, and they do it because they love doing that. Everybody eats, and the better you are, the more competitive you are, the tastier your food is. The customers love you, and most sort of restaurateurs kind of stop there, right? They don't think about all the enabling mechanisms of, like, the tech stack, or, like, how do I sign up for a third-party sort of delivery platform? How do I market myself? How do I do this at scale? So I don't know that I would necessarily call it disruption, but I would much rather sort of refer to it as innovation, right? So there's the only thing that's being disrupted is kind of the old way, which is like, I'm just going to deal with the problem, right? So there's a lot of innovative stuff happening, from robotics all the way to, you probably saw Sweetgreen, which is one of our partners. They launched their own sort of robotic kitchen, and there are a lot of restaurants that are exploring stuff like that. So it's a very highly evolving ecosystem, not only the downstream side, but also on the production side of things, right? So the ag tech, a dear friend of mine, Edward Chandrovich, runs a company called Synonym, and it's like, biomanufacturing, right? So the stuff that those guys are doing, it's just like space age stuff. And so I'm really excited about where we are, that food tech entire ecosystem from upstream all the way to downstream, is going to evolve in the next 5 to 10 years. It's very, very exciting to see.
Great. So we talked a little bit about Sharebite, your customers. I want to better understand your customers. We know you work with corporations and restaurants. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works? How are you building relationships with restaurants, and kind of what sets you apart from the competition?
Yeah. So I'll start with the restaurant side of things, right? Uh, Early on, it was a big challenge for us to go and sign up restaurants, because it's like, who are you guys? I don't know you. I've never heard of you. Are you going to send me business? Right. And, people would take a flyer on us, and, we honored, sort of whatever, that they wanted in exchange for that. But over time, what we realized was that the only thing that matters is the aggregation of demand. And what Sharebite does is we aggregate the most premium type of demand, which is the enterprise, right? And so the type of companies that we service have headcounts, from 20,000 people, right, 20,000 employees, all the way to 20 employees, right? We can service all of them. But the sweet spot is somewhere around. Those are I gave you the full range, but the sweet spot tends to be, somewhere in the few hundred employee range, maybe 1,000 employee range. Those are the types of companies that we typically service. So these are category leading companies across every single industry. So if you're looking at financial services, asset management, hedge funds, private equity firms, we literally have all of them, right? And if we don't, they're probably in the pipeline joining us, right? But and that extends across every vertical. So 35 of the Vault 50 law firms exclusively use Sharebite. Every single customer that we have exclusively uses Sharebite to feed their employees, no matter what it is that they want, right? So, so there's those types of companies, right? So you got professional services, but like there's an entire long tail of other customers that we previously, back in the day, we never really had on our radar. So today we've got professional sports teams that use us. We've got automotive manufacturers. We've got two of the biggest social media companies, that use us, right? We've got public transit companies like NJ Transit. Audible is a customer of ours, and they're very proud of our partnership. And sort of, so if you look at like a cross section of the type of customers that we have, it's literally the who's who of every industry. While I'm proud of that, I don't want to take away from the work that it took, the work that our team put in to go and be able to sign up customers like that, or actually demonstrate thought leadership into why you should feed your employees. And it comes down to the pain points, right? So the old school customers that used to previously use Seamless, that's a no-brainer. Our tech is better, our product is better, and we do everything, exponentially better. So, and of course the mission, and we're a transparent, mission-driven company. So it's also a very feel-good story. So those customers were like, okay, we'll give you a shot. And then all of a sudden the entire industry would switch over, because they, it's all tight-knit. They all talk to each other. Nowadays, there have been certain inflection points, particularly around return to the office. And so when these big category leading companies have been very successful at bringing their employees back to the office, they get their peer firms or their competitors or whatnot asking like, how are you so successful? We're literally across the street. We haven't been as successful bringing our employees back. Well, we feed our employees, right? We subsidize their meals, right? In exchange for coming in, or we geofence them for being at the office, right? So it's like, you can only unlock your meal stipend if you're at the office. And so ultimately, like, we've always been a quiet company, relatively quiet company. We have not made a whole lot of noise. We've always kind of had that sort of boring is beautiful kind of mindset.
Right.
Thankfully, the world today loves companies like us, right? Because you know, the zero interest rate sort of environment created all kinds of different incentives for companies that were loud and boisterous. But we've always been a boring company, and we're kind of very comfortable being that. So we've quietly amassed all of this market share. Um, so uh, particularly, so for corporate customers, it's very clear, right? Some of it is relationship driven, but also they're looking at very specific pain points. So, and those tend to fall in, a few buckets here, right? One is I've got an employee engagement problem, right? I've forced people to come back to the office, and they're all upset, and so we think that a lot of those employees are going to end up leaving for other companies that have more flexible arrangements. How do we make it worth their while? Feed them. Okay. What's the benchmarking? Well, this is what the average company does. Oh, that's not that much. $10 a day? Are you serious? And then it's all of a sudden it's like, $10 a day, $8 a day. Some companies, do much more. If you do, a little bit less, but for the most part, $10 a day does the trick, right? And it brings the employee back to the office, gets them, a healthy, nutritious meal that they can at least mostly subsidized, um, and it allows them to also form this community, right? Because if you go to on site at any one of our customers, you'll hear the phrase, "What are you going to share by today?" And that's really cool.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. And so you've got to, we take a lot of pride in that stuff, and bringing employees back to the office and getting them fed is also good for the economy. It's good for the ecosystem. It's good for sort of the small businesses that depend on cities and this foot traffic to thrive. So we take a lot of pride in that. The other buckets tend to be more at the C-suite level. You know, um, you know, yes, return to the office is one component, but like we're spending all this money on benefits that nobody ever uses, right? And so, you hear from CFOs all the time, we've got a pet insurance policy, for all employees. I support that, but not everyone's going to have a pet. Not everyone's going to utilize it. Adoption benefits, again, noble cause. Not everyone's going to utilize it, right? So these are the things that companies are sitting there paying for. And, when you listen to CHROs or heads of total rewards or benefits, they're like, look, if we have a 7% utilization rate on any benefit, we're all throwing a party. We're high-fiving each other. And I'm sitting there saying like, let me just share with you that a daily meal stipend has a 93% utilization rate. It literally
Right.
the other benefit that you offer employees to shame, right?
Right.
Everybody eats.
Everyone eats.
Exactly. So a lot of companies that have signed up for Sharebite previously never fed their employees. And now that they're doing it, they're never stopping. They're never getting rid of it. So like that is so fulfilling to us because again, even 5 years ago, day duck, I've told you, we're going to get every worker in America fed and we're going to power that. And so the pandemic and sort of the aftermath of it and the return to the office, conversation has really accelerated our vision. And so it really comes down to, employee engagement, giving employees the benefits that they will actually utilize, right? And companies want to pay for that, right? In the environment where everyone's cutting costs, you talk to CFOs, they're not just cutting costs, right? They want to make sure they're not afraid of making investments. They just don't want to sort of spend money on things that are like not value add for them, right? High ROI
Right.
products. So this is one of those things that as companies hear about this stuff, and then it's a snowball effect, right? Like who else uses you? And then they see our logo list, and they're just like, oh, why are we not doing that? So today, the conversation with building relationships with corporate clients is the easiest that we've ever had, right? And it will continue to get easier as larger companies continue to adapt this framework.
Yeah, this future of work, return to work, and you hear companies that struggle getting their employees back, but when you hear 93% utilization for a benefit versus the inverse of 7% on some of the other benefits, that's a big difference. Sounds like your thesis for future of work is feed your employees. That gets them back into the office. That gets collaboration, production. Helps on a broad spectrum of things for companies, right? Challenges they're dealing with. Is that kind of is that how you would sum it up, or?
Absolutely. So, I've given a couple of talks around the future of work, and I don't know that, you know, there's more that needs to be said about the future of work because that's the current of work. That's like the now, right?
Right.
The future is happening right now. And look, personally, I support, in office work, right? Because that culture, that collaboration, the serendipitous moments, the random joke on the floor that everyone laughs, the birthday party, things like that. There's this feeling of community, and people get to compartmentalize sort of work and then their personal lives. However, that's not for some companies, right? Ourselves included, right? Remote works really well for us. It's really hard to build and propagate your culture on a remote basis. But for companies where that works, we service remote companies too. There are a lot of remote companies that are like, wait, how do I let my employees know that we care about them, and not in like a transactional manner, on a Zoom, and then and we're able to service them too, right? Like the product works globally, and so when it comes to the future of work, I'm kind of tired about. I'm kind of tired of talking about the future of work. I want to start talking about the future of workers, right? And so my view is that, look, the American economy is literally the envy of every single nation across the globe, right? Developed and developing. But I don't think you could say that about the American workers. And that's a sad state because, the average person, right? You may not know this, but the average worker in America is really struggling to get by, right? Every little bit helps. Every little bit of goodwill helps. And this is a rounding error on an income statement of any company.
Right.
When we're talking about $2,000 a year, right? It's a rounding error for employees. So that makes a huge difference. And, food insecurity in the workplace is like the invisible epidemic. It's an invisible epidemic. There is a good chance that somebody at your company is food insecure and they will never tell anybody about it because it just doesn't pay. Society's not set up that way, right? And I know that because early in my career, I also went through that, right? And the only way I was able to make ends meet was, when I worked at, I started my career at Goldman Sachs and grew up at Credit Suisse. First 2 years, nearly 2 years of my career, I didn't know where my next meal was coming from because I had parents to take care of. I had bills to pay, all kinds of things where every dollar that I was making was paycheck to paycheck, right? So that came at the sacrifice of you know what, I'm not going to have breakfast today, right? Or I'm not going to do this. So I remember, when you stayed late at the office, we got a $20, meal allowance, right? And so I would order dinner and I'd eat half of that for dinner and then save the other half for lunch the next day. And so this year, and you know what, for many, many years, I was ashamed of that, right? I never really talked about it, just assumed it was the case. And earlier this year, I did an interview with NASDAQ where I told that story very vocally and openly. And I started getting text messages from, some of my friends that watched it. And these are some of the most successful and well-to-do people that I know, right? Partners at investment banks, partners at private equity firms, CEO of a public company. He's like, hey, that hit home. That hit home. And I'm like, what do you mean? I thought you were, no, man, when I went, when I started my career, we were living in a small apartment with like 5 people, right? And all I was doing was working just to kind of make ends meet. So, your employees are fighting a battle that they will never tell anybody about, right? And so, food insecurity, particularly in the workplace, especially if you're working at these companies, any company, right? Let alone these, prestigious organizations, it's surprising to hear that, people are just getting by. You just don't know what's going on in their lives. So,
Oh yeah.
solving that problem, solving food insecurity in the workplace, is gonna be a force multiplier for not only your culture, but really for our economy, right? For our workers and the plight of America's workers. So, especially in an environment like we're going through right now, where it's very difficult, people are very struggling very hard to afford things. Um, I cannot think of a higher calling than to give back to this country and our people at a time that it needs people like us the most.
Dilip, thank you for saying that. That's great. I think a lot of people just don't talk about this stuff, right? And sharing, coming from you, the CEO of the company, that's huge, right? And I'm sure you're able to spread that, message across your company and your customers as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I never shared it with a whole lot of people, right? There's some people at our company, especially early on, because you always ask like why, right? I get the question of like, hey, look, you're academically trained engineer, you're a former investment banker, you've got all the Ivy League stamps. Like, why do meal benefits mean anything to you? You could literally go do anything else you want. And it's like, if you're going to do something and commit your time and your purpose, and really just kind of like to do something like more very deliberate and very purposeful, make sure it's like an outsized ambitious goal, right? And so this is a very, very tall order even today, right? Like, I was just watching a video from 2017 when, because we were we got the we work creator award, and I was up on stage talking about Sharebite. And I remember going up on stage and saying, like, our mission is to end hunger, first in the workplace, but also at the same time in communities. And so, as you probably know, that mission of, for every transaction that happens on our platform, we donate a meal through Feeding America and City Harvest to help somebody else who defines hunger very, very differently, to help feed them. And so, in the last year, this is probably a good proxy for our company's growth. In the last 12 months, so last November of 2022, we celebrated a 5 million donation milestone. Okay. Tomorrow, we're going to surpass 8 million. So in the last
wow.
months, we have celebrated 5 million meals, 6 million meals, 7 million meals, and tomorrow, 8 million meals. So
Congratulations.
we're very proud.
That's a amazing achievement.
We're very, very proud of it. Uh, so anyway, you've known Sharebite for a long time, and you've been around sort of the struggles, the shared struggles that this team went through, especially particularly during the pandemic, where we didn't know what the world was going to look like. And there were investors that were at some point called me up and were like, "Hey, this has been a nice run. You should shut down the company." And I was like, "I'm not going to do that. All right,
Yeah.
I'm going to take a zero salary." And when our management team heard that, they were like, "We'll sacrifice our salaries too, and we're all going to move back into our parents' homes, and then we're going to do this." And so today, the business is like, again, to not to sort of belabor the point. We've not only proven out that thesis, but like I'm very, very excited about where the company is headed. So, as a mission-driven company that genuinely exists to help end hunger, first in the workplace, but also in our communities and our neighborhoods, while also supporting our small businesses, it's something very, very fulfilling. And that's why we have the team that we have today, right? Like, our voluntary attrition is like minimal. And they're all in it for all the right reasons. They're mission-driven entrepreneurs who are here, and to get every worker in America fed. So, what is good for Sharebite is good for every worker in America, and I'm really excited about that.
Really glad to hear. Thank you, Dilip. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. 8 million meals. Is there, what's the future hold for Sharebite? If you had to end on a, you're mission driven, talk about you talk about your mission. It's great to hear. What's the future look for Sharebite?
Well, I would love to put a few zeros at the end of that 8 million. Right. And that's the beauty of this thing, right? Like, the more companies that adopt it, the more meals that get donated to people in need, and the more workers that get fed. So yeah, it's a very ambitious goal. It's an ambitious vision. It's always been, and we work with a lot of ambitious people. So that's what I'm excited about. The pipeline of customers continues to be so robust, and it's very fulfilling to be able to be in this position to close out a year like this, and even last year, and to be in a position of strength the way that we are. And building a company is hard, as you know. You talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. I once heard someone say, it's like chewing glass, right? You're starting a company is like chewing glass. But working with such smart and talented, ambitious, and mission-driven people help makes that whole journey like so much more worthwhile. So yeah, I don't have much else to say, but very, very excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Dilip.
Thanks so much, Lonnie. And yeah, you can visit our website and sign up in the form, and someone will get back to you like within minutes. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And Lonnie, thank you for allowing me to tell the story of Sharebite here.
Dilip, I appreciate the time today. It's always a pleasure chatting with you and talking about the Sharebite mission. If there are any listeners out there that want to connect separately on anything food tech or want to learn more about Sharebite, feel free to reach out to myself or Dilip directly. And thank you again for the time.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked it and want to hear more, you can follow us and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Founded in Tech.